A guy gets reincarnated into another world and awakens a rare power, water manipulation. With this ability, he doesn't just control water, he tames deadly aquatic beasts, turning them into his loyal pets. But that's just the beginning. He pushes them beyond their limits, evolving them into monstrous sea creatures powerful enough to dominate both land and sea. And he's only getting started. Now, let's dive in. In a distant land, Liang stood frozen, eyes locked on the horizon as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold. The crisp morning air filled his lungs, the serenity almost dreamlike, until a voice shattered the moment. His father's voice. It had been so long since he'd heard it, yet it felt familiar, warm, comforting. Without hesitation, he ran toward it. They spent the morning at the lake, checking their fishing nets. Just another ordinary day. But somehow, it felt different. Maybe it was the way a crab latched onto his foot, sending him flailing while his father nearly choked from laughing too hard. Or the meaningless scribbles they carved onto the side of their boat, just because. Simple things, but for the first time in a long while, he forgot everything else. Time slipped by unnoticed until the sun dipped below the horizon. Before heading home, they lingered by the shore, watching the sky's reflection ripple across the water. That's when he saw it. A red carp, its shimmering scales catching the last light of day. A rare sight. Without thinking, he dived in after it. The second he hit the water, the world shifted. The fish was gone. The lake, eerily silent. No signs of life. He tried to move, but something held him in place. His chest tightened, his limbs grew heavy, and panic set in. He could only hope his father would pull him out. But before he could even process the thought, everything faded to black. And then, he woke up. His father was gone. Instead, two unfamiliar figures loomed over him. Reality crashed down like a cruel slap. Everything had been a dream. In truth, he was tied up, captured by these bastards. Zhang had played him like a fiddle, pretending to guide him when all they wanted was to use him as bait for the water monster. A nasty trick, but Liang kept his cool. After all, this wasn't his first life. He was a transmigrator. It had been a month since he arrived in this world, inheriting this body. The original owner had died of an illness, leaving behind a lonely past, a mother lost in childbirth, a father who raised him alone, and a final tragedy 3 months ago when that father succumbed to disease. Yet, despite being a foreign soul, Liang had absorbed all those emotions, the grief, the longing, as if they were his own. It was strange, experiencing a past life that wasn't his, yet feeling like it was. In that month, he'd also uncovered something else. This world was nothing like the one he came from. People here could train their bodies and minds to surpass human limits, becoming cultivators. And it wasn't just humans. Beasts could evolve too, transforming into mythical creatures of terrifying power. And, just his luck, one of those creatures had just surfaced. Even Zhang, a trained cultivator, looked like he was about to piss himself. He'd expected a small threat, maybe half a meter long at most. Turns out, whoever gave him that info deserved a slap. The moment the beast rose, the entire boat rocked violently, throwing them all into a panic. But Zhang wasn't the type to just accept death. A decade of training wasn't for nothing. If this monster wanted a fight, it was getting one. As the beast lunged, he met it head-on with everything he had. It was pointless. The thing was massive. Its jaws alone could swallow a grown man whole, which it did. Before Zhang could even process what was happening, he was gone, snapped up like a snack. The boat? Reduced to splinters. And that left one very panicked old man. This wasn't how his story was supposed to end, so he scrambled for a way out. And then, a downright evil idea struck him. Without hesitation, he stabbed Liang's hand and shoved him straight into the water, hoping the blood would serve as a distraction. Liang, still tied up, sank instantly. The weight of his restraints dragged him down, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He thrashed against the ropes, twisting and biting at them. His teeth tore at the rough fibers, agonizingly slow, but after what felt like an eternity, they loosened just enough. He broke free. New problem: oxygen. He had already sunk too deep. His vision blurred, darkness creeping at the edges. And then, Through the haze, an image appeared, his father's outstretched hand. He knew it wasn't real, just a memory. But his body acted on instinct, reaching for it. His fingers closed around something solid, a log. Not just any log, the very same one from his father's boat, the one they had carved their faces into all those years ago. A rush of emotions hit him, relief, gratitude, even a strange warmth despite the freezing water. Somehow, even in death, his father had saved him again. But the moment didn't last. Blood from his wound spread through the water. The monster caught his scent. Before he could react, razor-sharp teeth clamped onto his leg. Pain exploded through him as he was yanked downward, dragged deeper into the abyss. The pressure built in his chest, the light above fading until only darkness remained. And then he saw it, the monster's lair. Countless bodies, long devoured, wrecked boats, shattered into pieces, piles of treasure gleaming like a cruel joke in the gloom. This was it. He had fought, struggled, done everything he could to survive. But it was obvious now. There was no escaping this. His breath was running out. With what little strength he had left, he closed his eyes and sent a silent apology to his father. But the monster wasn't done playing with him yet. It slammed him into the ground, toying with him like a predator savoring its meal. Pain shot through his body, but before he could succumb to it, something else happened. His blood, drifting through the water, seeped into the lake bed. It touched something ancient, something long forgotten beneath the wreckage, a water cauldron, and within it, an ancient power stirred. In that instant, a surge of energy coursed through Liang's body. It was foreign, yet strangely familiar, like a force molding itself to fit him perfectly. A system. The power took shape in a form he instinctively understood, one that felt eerily similar to the games he used to play before he transmigrated. And its primary ability? Water manipulation. The change was instant. The water, once a suffocating enemy, now felt like home. His wounds sealed, his body strengthened, and suddenly, it was as if he was standing on solid ground. The usual resistance of water no longer applied to him, and for a second, he wondered if he had somehow broken reality. Then, as if responding to his thoughts, a notification popped up in his mind. A system. It explained everything. He had gained a skill called water control. The ability to manipulate water currents and, more importantly, breathe underwater. A game changer. The lake was no longer his grave. It was his battlefield. Before he could even wrap his head around it, the beast struck again, lunging to finally end him. But this time, he wasn't helpless. With just a thought, the water obeyed him, twisting and surging, trapping the monster mid-swim. Power rushed through him, intoxicating and exhilarating. In this domain, he had no limits, or so he thought. Reality hit fast. This power was new, raw, and nowhere near stable. The beast thrashed violently, breaking free with ease. It lunged again, jaws snapping, but with his newfound mobility, he slipped through the water effortlessly. Dodging was fine and all, but he needed to go on the offensive. Without a weapon, though, he was at a disadvantage. As if reading his desperation, the system answered again. Turns out, water control wasn't his only trick. He had another skill: blood domination. Through his own blood, he could inscribe ancient runes, forming a contract with aquatic spirit beasts. His pulse quickened. This was exactly what he needed. The beast surged forward once more, and he seized the opportunity. With a flick of his will, the water locked it in place just long enough for him to carve the necessary runes into existence, forming a blood domination talisman. The second the beast broke free, he wove around its massive form and slammed the talisman onto its head. But forming a contract wasn't as simple as slapping a sticker on a monster and calling it a day. It was a battle of wills. The beast retaliated, its spiritual force lashing out with the intent to crush his very soul. His vision darkened, his body locked up, and for a terrifying moment, he felt himself losing. The creature's will was relentless, an overwhelming force trying to swallow his existence whole. Too bad for it. Liang wasn't just some weakling. He had lived twice, and his soul carried the weight of both lives. A mere beast wasn't going to break him. His energy surged in defiance, pushing back with everything he had, And in the end, he won. The contract was sealed. He shot up to the surface, breaking through the water with a desperate gasp. Air flooded his lungs, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he could finally breathe. The beast followed, rising from the depths, but it was no longer an enemy. Now, it was his. Its massive form loomed over the lake, eyes locked onto him, not with hostility, but with reverence. It had fully submitted. Still, there was one tiny problem. He couldn't exactly waltz into the village with a giant, terrifying water beast trailing behind him. That would raise all sorts of questions, none of which he was in the mood to answer. So, he gave it a simple order: stay hidden. Thanks to their newly forged spiritual bond, he could summon it whenever he needed. The beast obeyed, retreating back to its lair, a perfect place to lay low until the time was right. Now, he just needed to get out of here. The next day, trouble came knocking. The old bastard who had thrown him in as bait strolled into the village, dragging along his crew and butler Jung. They weren't here to mourn. In their eyes, Liang was already dead. And that meant his father's fortune was up for grabs. As far as the old geezer was concerned, it was fair compensation for their failed mission. After all, Zhang was dead. Their plan had gone to hell, and someone had to pay for it. So, with greed in his eyes, he led his men straight to Liang's house. The moment they reached the door, they kicked it wide open, fully expecting an empty room. Instead, they froze. Because standing right there, very much alive, was Liang. For a long, awkward moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just stood there, dumbfounded. The shock didn't last long. Butler Jung's face twisted with pure rage as he turned on the old geezer, furious that he hadn't bothered to check his facts. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter. In Jung's mind, Liang was the reason everything had gone wrong, and someone had to take the fall. Without a second thought, he ordered his men to restrain him and teach him a lesson. Apparently, Zhang's death wasn't just an inconvenience. It had cost Zhang a fortune. And to make things worse, the entire village was now at risk because the beast was still out there. And according to them, that was all Liang's fault, which was absolute bullshit. Liang wasn't about to let them pin this on him, so he fired back, throwing the real blame on the old man. But the bastard was too cunning to get caught in a corner. Instead, he flipped the whole thing on its head, pointing out something suspicious: Liang's survival. How could a brat possibly return alive unless he was working with the beast? And just like that, the accusation shifted. Now, Liang wasn't just some troublemaker. He was a monster. A traitor who had tamed the water beast, responsible for Zhang's death. Ridiculous. But this wasn't his first time being labeled a freak. Back in his previous life, he had been an orphan. And society? Oh, they just loved to slap a stigma on kids like him. The rumors spread like wildfire. Orphans were cursed, bad luck, or had sticky fingers. No matter what he did, that label never left. But there was one thing he refused to do then, and he sure as hell wasn't doing it now: roll over. Especially not for someone uglier than him. The old bastard was already missing a tooth. Liang figured he might as well help him lose a few more. He wasn't about to let them shove him around, so without hesitation, he tackled the old geezer, shoving him hard enough to send him stumbling. At the same time, his focus locked onto the nearest basin of water. They wanted him to be a monster so badly? Fine. He'd show them what a real monster looked like. Water surged up his arm, twisting and coiling like a serpent. His fury sharpened his focus, and for a moment, he was ready to take every single one of them to the grave. Then, a voice cut through the chaos. His childhood friend had arrived, alongside the village chief. The weight of the chief's presence alone was enough to make even Butler Jung hesitate. The old man may have looked ancient, but he was still an official of the dynasty, someone with real authority. Jung wasn't stupid enough to challenge that. Which meant, no matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't do a damn thing. But that didn't mean he was letting it go. Before storming off, Jung shot the chief a venomous glare, promising that his master, Zhang, would hear about this. The old man wasn't fazed. He knew an empty threat when he heard one. Even Zhang himself would bow before him if it came down to it. With that, Liang let out a slow breath and turned to the chief, giving him a nod of thanks before heading out as well. But he knew better. This wasn't over. Situations like this would keep happening over and over again, unless he did something about it. So, he made a decision. If he wanted to survive in this world, he had to use his system to the fullest, and he had to get stronger, fast. That's when he noticed something strange. His water essence was increasing. At first, he wasn't sure why his water essence was increasing. Then it clicked. His crocodile pet had something to do with it. Intrigued, he waited for nightfall before heading back to the lake. Activating his spirit link, he called out to his water beast, and when it finally surfaced, it was tiny. Liang blinked, completely caught off guard. Before he could start asking questions, the system chimed in, explaining that subdued, contracted beasts could shrink or grow at will to conserve energy. Made sense. But he wasn't here to marvel at his pet's new party trick. He needed answers. So, he ordered the little guy to show him where this sudden surge of water essence was coming from. Without hesitation, the croc dove in and Liang followed. The beast led him deeper into the lake, weaving through the murky depths before slipping into a hidden underwater cave. The moment Liang stepped inside, his eyes widened. The cave floor was covered in legendary spirit plants, glowing faintly with rich spiritual energy. He reached out, brushing his fingers against one, and instantly, a system prompt popped up. He could absorb them. Jackpot. In this world, spiritual materials and treasures absorbed extraordinary energies over time, making them incredibly valuable. Spirit plants, in particular, had unique effects depending on their properties. Rumor had it that in Zhao Manor's backyard there was a frozen pond where special vines grew at the bottom, so rare and powerful that Master Zhao used them to lure cultivators into servitude. And yet, here he was, standing in a cave full of them. If he absorbed these, his water essence would skyrocket, exactly what he needed. Without hesitation, he got to work, gathering everything he could. He considered asking his beast for help, but when he glanced over, the croc was already stuffed, lazily floating around after devouring a few plants itself. Fair enough. It had earned a nap for leading him here. Once he had collected everything, he wasted no time. The moment he ate the first plant, his water essence increased by 1. Not only that, it tasted amazing. Way too good, actually. Before he knew it, he was devouring them one after another, absorbing as much water essence as possible. The more he had, the better his fusion with aquatic spirits, and the faster his water beasts could evolve. And there were a lot of plants, so many that, at one point, he became an absolute unit, a bloated mess from overindulgence. But it was worth it. By the time he was done, he had gained 25 water essence. Immediately, he invested it into his fusion with the water monkey bloodline, increasing it from 5% to 7.5%, a significant boost. If he ever ran into those bastards from before, he could wipe the floor with them. But that could wait. Right now, he had a bigger issue. He was broke. And with autumn coming to an end, he had another problem. Crocodiles slowed down during hibernation, meaning soon enough, he wouldn't be able to rely on them for hunting. So the plan was simple. Exploit them while they were still useful, and make as much profit as possible before they became dead weight. With that in mind, he ordered his croc to hunt as many fish as possible, stacking up a massive haul before selling them off. The merchants in this world weren't like the aggressive hustlers from his previous life. They were way easier to convince. And just like that, his financial struggles were covered. Now, on to the next step. It was time to settle things with that old geezer who tried to set him up. But before he could even make a move, the bastard practically handed himself over on a silver platter. Apparently the old man was looking for him to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. To prove his sincerity, he even invited Liang for a meal on his boat. Just the two of them. Liang nearly laughed out loud. It was so blatantly obvious what he was trying to do. But instead of calling him out, he played along. Because this was exactly what he wanted. A few hours before the meetup, the old geezer was getting the beating of his life. The butler's men had pummeled him into the ground for his failure, making sure he understood just how badly he had screwed up. For the first time ever, the butler had been humiliated in front of so many people, and there was no way he was letting that slide. But killing the old man outright would be a waste. Master Zhao still had a use for him. Zhao needed materials for his pill refinement. Not just any materials, but a true orphan child. And the old man's new task? Abduct Liang and make a statement. They needed everyone to know that crossing them was a death sentence. And at the same time, Zhao would get what he needed for his so-called masterpiece. If the old man pulled this off, he was promised immortality, and that alone drove him completely insane. Desperate to succeed, he accepted a power-boosting seal, one that would temporarily push his strength beyond its limits. With this, he was certain capturing Liang alive would be easy. But brute force wasn't his first choice. He had a simpler plan: poison. The idea was straightforward. Lace the soup with a toxin, not one that would kill, just something strong enough to weaken Liang, keep him from resisting or screaming. A clean, easy capture. Unfortunately for him, Liang had zero patience for games. Instead of taking a sip, he chose violence first. With a flick of his hand, a stream of water shot out, wrapping around the old man's head before he could react. The invisible grip tightened as he clawed at his face, trying to pry it off, but it was useless. He couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. And then, everything went black. By the time he woke up, night had fallen. His body ached, his mind spun, and worst of all, he was tied up. His first instinct was to play innocent, asking Liang what he planned to do, as if he wasn't the one who had just tried to drug him. Liang wasn't buying it. He already had proof in his hands. The old man had been bribed, and with that, Liang knew exactly what to do with him. There was a perfect place for people like him, the same spot where they had first encountered the water beast. Except this time, the beast belonged to Liang. The old bastard had wanted him to be a monster so badly. Fine, he'd give him what he wanted. Suddenly, the geezer had a change of heart. He didn't want Liang to be a monster after all. His entire attitude flipped, and he started apologizing profusely, swearing he'd tell him everything if he just spared his life. Lucky for him, Liang agreed. That was all it took for the truth to spill out. The butler had ordered his abduction. And not just him, other orphans as well. To the Zhao mansion, they weren't people. They were materials, ingredients for refining a celestial pill, a pill that could grant immortality. The moment the words left his mouth, the old man realized how bad it was. Desperate to save himself, he backpedaled, claiming he was a victim too, that he was only following orders, forced into this against his will. Too bad for him, Liang didn't care. Forced or not, the bastard already knew too much about him. That alone sealed his fate. No excuses would change that. But that didn't mean Liang was safe. The Zhao family wouldn't just sit idle. The old man's sudden disappearance would eventually lead them straight to him. And when that happened, he needed to be ready. His only option now? Become a cultivator. Fast. The fastest way to secure his future was to join a martial arts school. Pingyang City had 3 martial schools, but only one reigned supreme, the Yang School. Its master was said to possess a legendary ability, capable of shattering gold and stone with his bare hands. That kind of strength and reputation kept the school at the top, and if Liang could get in, the Zhao family wouldn't dare touch him. After all, if a student of the Yang School disappeared, the school wouldn't just sit back and let it slide. The only problem? The entry fee, 8 taels of silver. Right now, he had 2. Meaning, he needed to make money, fast. With that in mind, he dove into the water to hunt again. His swimming had improved significantly over the past few days, mostly thanks to his pet. The little guy had become his sparring partner for speed training, forcing him to push himself further. Through this, he had developed a new technique, compressing water beneath his feet before releasing it all at once for a burst of speed. There was just one issue. It drained his energy way too fast. For now, it was only useful for quick bursts, but it was still an advantage. Just as he was settling into his usual rhythm, something unusual caught his eye. A fish glowing bright red. Definitely a spiritual fish. In this world, certain creatures evolved under the influence of special energy, mutating into bizarre, powerful forms. Giant scorpion beetles, 2-headed razor-toothed sharks, and iron fin whales were all prime examples. And right in front of him? 2 of them. This was an opportunity he couldn't afford to pass up. Without hesitation, he ordered his croc to shift back to its original size and chase one of the fish while he went after the other. With his new technique, he closed the distance easily, using his water manipulation to trap the fish in a bubble. Just like that, he had it. Or at least, he thought he did. The moment he secured his catch, the water around him shifted. Something big was moving in the depths. Before he could react, A massive force wrapped around him and slammed him straight into the lakebed. The impact knocked the breath out of him, but this was no time to pass out. He locked eyes with the attacker and instantly realized what it was. The six-whiskered catfish, a notorious man-eater. And just to make things worse, this son of a fish had tricks, just like him. Before he could move, the beast conjured a massive water orb, aiming straight for him. Unfortunately for it, Liang was stronger. He shattered the orb before it could fully charge, but instead of retreating, the beast got pissed. It lashed out with its tail, aiming to finish him off. Luckily, his croc slid in just in time, intercepting the attack. Before the beast could recover, the croc hit it with a brutal slam, driving it straight into the ground, and that was Liang's cue. Wasting no time, he activated his blood talisman, attempting to subdue the creature. That's when things got messy. The six-whiskered catfish had far stronger spiritual energy than the croc, and the moment their wills clashed, his entire system crashed. Warning messages flooded his mind. Mental overload. His body spasmed. His vision blurred. But he couldn't back down. If he lost now, this thing wouldn't just kill them, it would devour them whole. So, he pushed through. His will to survive was stronger, and in the end, he won. The beast shrank instantly, its body compacting to conserve energy, just like the croc. And the best part? It could evolve into a tigerhead whale. Since it was already round and pudgy, Liang figured the name Chonky was perfect. With that handled, he turned his attention back to the loot. Sure enough, the croc had managed to capture the other spiritual fish. Giving it a well-deserved head pat, he decided they all deserved a feast. Roasting up some fish for them, he also cooked a smaller spiritual fish, curious to see if he could extract water essence from it. And he could. 18 points worth. That had him ecstatic. If a small fish yielded that much, a bigger one could easily give him triple. That meant he could definitely push past a 10% fusion rate. As tempting as that was, he also needed money for the Yang school. For now, the priority was cash. Liang arrived at Yixing Market, where the streets were packed with people buying and selling goods. This was the perfect place to sell his spiritual fish, a prime spot to attract the right customers. But even he wasn't expecting this kind of crowd. It felt like there was some kind of festival going on. Then, he saw the reason. A man standing in the center, proudly holding up another spiritual fish. It didn't take long to figure out what was happening. A member of the Chen family had just arrived, and he wasn't here to buy. He was here to flex. Apparently, he had caught a spiritual fish of his own and was more than happy to show it off. That explained the massive audience. Instead of feeling discouraged, Liang's excitement only grew. This was the perfect opportunity. Wasting no time, he pushed his way through the crowd, eager to see what kind of fish the guy had. Of course, he wasn't here just to spectate. He was a master manipulator, and he knew exactly how to steal the spotlight. The moment he got close, he proudly displayed his own spirit fish, fully expecting the crowd's attention to shift. It didn't. Instead of awe, he was met with confusion. Instead of excitement, outright rejection. People started scoffing, saying his fish didn't even look like a spiritual fish, just some deformed, ugly creature that only a clueless amateur would bother catching. Before he knew it, the mockery rolled in full force. The crowd didn't hold back. Even Chen, the so-called expert, was smirking like he was watching some idiot embarrass himself. Then the atmosphere shifted. A cultivator had arrived. The moment he stepped into the scene, the laughter faded. He was Hu, a respected master from the Yang martial arts school. And since Chen was standing closest, his gaze naturally fell on the crimson bloodfish in his hands. Without hesitation, Hu asked for the price. Chen, recognizing the man's high status, wasn't about to throw out a number himself. Instead, he let the cultivator decide what he thought was fair. Hu casually offered 3 taels. The second those words left his mouth, Chen's face barely hid his excitement. That was way more than he had expected. But just as the deal was about to close, Liang made his move. Before the cultivator could finalize the purchase, he whipped out his own fish and held it up. The crowd, still high on their mockery, thought he was just digging his own grave. Some even chuckled, convinced he was about to get shut down harder than before. Except, the cultivator's reaction was the complete opposite. The moment his eyes landed on Liang's fish, excitement flickered across his face. It wasn't just a spirit fish. It was a red blood perch, a rare and highly valuable one at that. And just like that, Hu immediately offered 6 tiles for it. The market went silent. The same people who had just laughed at him stood frozen, completely dumbfounded. They had been so sure that Liang was the idiot, yet in a single moment, he had just outshined Chen completely. 6 taels. That was more than most families could save in generations. The shock quickly turned to envy. One guy in the crowd even had the nerve to throw out a veiled threat, disguising it as a joke. But Liang, he didn't care. Without hesitation, he finalized the transaction, unbothered by the stares burning into his back. And just like that, Chen, who had been basking in his own success minutes ago, was forced to step aside. The cultivator wasn't interested in his fish anymore. But before handing it over, Liang decided to dig a little deeper. If his fish was worth double the price of a crimson bloodfish, he wanted to know why. Casually, he asked the cultivator about it. Luckily for him, Hu was in a good mood and didn't mind explaining. Turns out, this particular fish was a key ingredient in a rare medicine, one used to craft special pills that strengthened essence and refined energy. These pills weren't just ordinary supplements, they helped cultivators break through the blood flow barrier, a crucial stage in martial cultivation. And as fate would have it, Hu was currently stuck at that exact bottleneck, meaning this fish was extremely valuable to him. Liang's perspective widened instantly. Up until now, he had only been thinking about selling fish for money, but now, he realized their true worth in cultivation. This changed everything. Grateful for the insight, he sincerely thanked the cultivator, knowing this knowledge would serve him well in the future. A little while later, Liang found himself sitting in an alley, counting his money. That's when someone appeared behind him. It was Libo, his childhood friend. Apparently, word had spread fast, and Libo had come looking for him after hearing about what had happened. He congratulated Liang, saying he had brought pride to their village, something Liang genuinely appreciated. Of course, Libo also saw an opportunity. Grinning, he teased Liang, saying that if he was really grateful, he should hand over the 6 taels of silver he had just earned. Liang ignored him completely. Instead, he got straight to the point, asking how much it actually cost to enroll in the Yang Martial Arts School. To his surprise, that question really excited Libo, especially since his father was just about to send him there as well. The school had 3 tiers of enrollment, 7 tiles for basic entry, with no lodging or meals, 10 taels if those were included, and 20 taels for a full package, training and medicinal baths. Expensive, yes, but it was also the best martial school in Pingyang, and that made it worth it. Liang thought so too. He couldn't help but smile. With everything he had gathered over the past few days, he had 9 taels of silver, meaning he could definitely afford the school. Without hesitation, he told Libo they could sign up together tomorrow. That made Libo even more excited. The timing was perfect. But just as the moment felt right, a familiar sensation pulsed in his mind. It was his pet, connecting to him through aqua sense. It wasn't a warning. It had found another mystic fish. The scene shifted to Zhao Manor, where Butler Zhao was reporting to a mysterious man. He informed him that Zhang had disappeared, but after searching, they had found a clue leading to Liang. The mysterious man showed no interest in the protagonist and simply ordered Butler Zhao to handle the matter alone. He did not want to hear anything more about it. With a serious expression, Butler Zhao understood the order. As soon as night fell, Liang returned to the lake. To his surprise, Chonky had already caught another spirit fish. Without wasting time, he decided to eat it, but of course, he wasn't some barbarian who just devoured things raw. Instead, he cooked it properly, seasoning it and making a rich, flavorful soup. The result? Incredible. The flavors blended so perfectly that even just the broth was enough to send his taste buds into a frenzy. His pets were practically drooling from the aroma, eyes locked on the fine meal in front of them. Luckily for them, Liang wasn't the stingy type. He generously shared portions with his companions, making sure everyone got their fill. And just like that, the meal wasn't just satisfying, it was rewarding. This spirit fish granted him 24 water essence, far more than the horned pommet, which had only given him 18. Wasting no time, he immediately used it to refine his power. As expected, the energy surging through him was even stronger than before. His fusion had now reached nearly 12%, and he was itching for a good fight just to see how much he had actually improved. But that wasn't the only thing that changed. His water control had also advanced significantly. If he wanted to, he could now lift his chunky little beast high into the air without breaking a sweat. Then, something else caught his attention. Their evolution requirements had dropped. The number had gone down from 800 to 779, and all he had done was feed them. That was insane. This discovery made him realize just how valuable the water cauldron truly was. It was more than just a tool. It had secrets, ones he needed to uncover. Was it a natural phenomenon? Or something far greater? Summoning the cauldron, he took a closer look. And that's when he noticed something interesting. One side of the carving showed a water monkey. On the opposite side, a winged dragon. But that wasn't all. There were other strange figures. One with a human head and a snake's body, and another cloaked in a robe, shrouded in mystery. Was this a clue to the cauldron's true origins? Maybe. But speculation wouldn't get him anywhere. For now, he needed to focus. Especially since tomorrow, he'd be enrolling in the Yang Martial Arts School. And just like that, the next day arrived. Liang and Libo were now traveling through the mountains in a carriage. And if Liang had to be honest, Libo's boundless enthusiasm was already making him question whether he should have just gone to school alone. The kid was practically bouncing in his seat. Eventually, they arrived in Pingyang City, a bustling hub where merchants and villagers gathered to trade goods. The streets were packed, the air buzzing with chatter, and the scent of freshly cooked street food filled the air. There was so much to see that they couldn't help but take a quick detour to explore. They tried different foods, admired handcrafted art unlike anything they had seen before, and even stumbled upon a bizarre show of strength, a man lying flat on bricks while some buff guy hammered him with his thing. Truly a shocking sight. Meanwhile, while they enjoyed themselves, a group of men was busy plotting something far less entertaining. They had been eyeing Liang's money for a while now, originally planning to rob him the day before. But after overhearing that he and Libo were headed to the Yang Martial Arts School, they realized there was an even bigger opportunity. 2 bags of money instead of 1. That thought alone had them salivating. Even if they sold their wives, they wouldn't see that kind of wealth. Stealing it was far too tempting to pass up. Still, some of them hesitated. With that much money, getting caught would mean serious trouble with the magistrate's office. But their leader shut down their worries with a grin. They wouldn't get caught. No one would ever find out. The 2 kids would definitely take the shortest route to the school, a shortcut barely anyone used. It was the perfect spot for an ambush. And sure enough, just as they had predicted, the 2 finally appeared. Without hesitation, the gang stepped out, blocking their path with smug grins. They demanded money, making it clear that Liang and Libo had only 2 options: hand it over willingly or end up buried by the roadside. They even laughed as they said it, as if this was all some sick joke. Unfortunately for them, the joke was about to be on them. Because Liang wasn't laughing. Instead, he smirked. A devious grin spread across his face as he made his decision. If they were so eager to bury someone by the roadside, then he'd gladly grant their wish. The thugs didn't take kindly to Liang's smirk. Furious, they lunged at him, ready to beat him into the dirt. Too bad for them, they never even got the chance. Before they could even finish winding up, Liang was already in front of them. His right hook connected first, cracking straight into the first guy's face. The second idiot barely had time to blink before Liang's elbow slammed into his nose. And he wasn't done. Before the guy could even hit the ground, Liang grabbed him by the hair like he was taking out the trash and hurled him straight into their leader. The poor bastard didn't even know what hit him. 1 second, he was standing there, all high and mighty. The next, Liang's fist was smashing his face straight into the ground, like he was planting a damn tree. And judging by the way the guy's neck bent at that nasty angle, no mortal should have survived that. The funny part? Liang hadn't even meant to go that hard. Even he was shocked. This was his first real fight since leveling up. And now? There was zero doubt that his physical abilities had skyrocketed alongside his waterbending powers. Libo, still standing there in complete disbelief, couldn't hold back his curiosity. Since when the hell had Liang gotten this strong? For as long as he had known him, he had never seen him display this level of power. Did he even need a master at this point? Liang, of course, wasn't about to explain. So, with the most half-assed excuse possible, he just shrugged and said he was a genius all along. And that was that. Libo clearly didn't buy it. He had known Liang for years. Genius was the last word anyone would use to describe him. But if Liang wasn't ready to talk, then fine. He wouldn't push it. For now, they still had a school to get to. Soon they arrived at the doorstep of the Young Martial Arts School, where they were greeted by a senior disciple named Xiang. As a formality, they returned the greeting before being led inside. Xiang guided them toward another instructor, the one who would be overseeing their test and explaining what it truly meant to be a member of the sect. That instructor turned out to be Senior Hu, and no, not the ordinary-looking dude, the one with the luxurious hair. Liang recognized him immediately. It was the same man from the market, the one who had bought his fish. To his surprise, Hu recognized him too. Xiang, however, was caught completely off guard. Seeing his confusion, Hu casually explained that they had met before. A small twist of fate, but one that pleased Xiang. At the very least, it meant they could skip lengthy introductions and get straight to business. And just like that, it was settled. From now on, the juniors would be under Senior Brother Hu's guidance. For tonight, they were allowed to stay in the Martial Hall. With that sorted, they thanked Xiang and formally greeted Hu. He acknowledged their respect, but made it clear. He was a busy man. He didn't have all day. So, without wasting time, he got straight to the point. The test would begin with an examination of their bone structure. Liang and Libo both hesitated. What the hell did that mean? Hu chuckled, amused by how anxious they looked. He reassured them that there was nothing to worry about. This was simply a way to determine which cultivation path suited them best. That was new to these countryside boys. Liang, never one to stay ignorant, took the opportunity to ask Hu about these so-called cultivation paths. Thankfully, Hu was a teacher at heart. Without hesitation, he explained. Martial arts were divided into 4 stages. The skin barrier hardened the body like oxhide, toughening the skin and greatly enhancing defense. The flesh barrier strengthened the muscles, making it possible to lift a grown man with one hand like it was nothing. The bone barrier unleashed power recklessly, allowing a cultivator to shatter stone and split monuments. And finally, the blood barrier, the last refinement, a complete enhancement, reinforcing every aspect of the body. Like embroidery on silk, except instead of making something pretty, it made someone terrifying. At its core, martial cultivation boiled down to one thing: refinement. But for ordinary people, no matter how much they refined their bodies, there was always a limit. And to break that limit, 2 things were indispensable: technique and medicine. Seeing the questioning look on their faces, Hu gave them an example. Yang Martial Hall had a 3-fist technique. With the right technique, a cultivator could ascend like stepping onto a stairway. But the path was steep, treacherous. To climb faster and steadier, one needed a handrail, and that handrail was medicine, just like the red-blood perch fish Liang had sold him. That fish? It was exactly the kind of resource cultivators needed for refinement. At that moment, something clicked in Liang's mind. A realization that both enlightened and delighted him. With his pets by his side, gathering these rare resources wouldn't be a problem at all. He was practically set for life. Hu, noticing the way his juniors were definitely plotting something, reminded them not to get ahead of themselves. The martial path was long. Rushing would only lead to setbacks. They needed to focus on each step, one at a time. Advice they both greatly appreciated. With that, they resumed the test, preparing to have their bone structures examined. Meanwhile, off to the side, a troublesome group had taken notice of them. A group led by Yang Kai, and judging by the way they carried themselves, it was obvious they weren't just random disciples. They were lackeys. Lackeys of Zhao Xuan, the 3rd young master of Zhao Manor. And Xuan, he had taken quite a liking to Liang. As long as Yang Kai and his followers managed to get rid of him and his friend, Xuan had promised them anything they wanted. Zhao Xuan's obsession with Liang wasn't just about personal interest. The real reason ran much deeper. Zhao Manor wasn't making pills to achieve immortality. At least, not in the way people assumed. No, their goal was far more specific. They were producing pills to heal Xuan. His older brother, Master Zhao, had long been searching for the perfect material to refine an elixir that could strengthen Xuan's frail body. And Liang, he was the ideal candidate. Same age, perfect compatibility. The problem? The brat had joined the Yang sect. That complicated things. Capturing him wouldn't be as easy anymore, and Master Zhao had more or less given up on the idea. But Xuan? He refused to let some orphan kid stand in his way. If no one else would handle it, he would. If he took care of this himself, things would go much smoother. And soon, finally, he would break free from his shackles and push through to his elixir aperture. Meanwhile, back at the sect, the bone structure test was over. Libo, however, was not okay. Still in complete disbelief, he was practically offended by the results. Liang had a top-tier bone structure. He, just a mid-high tier. Unacceptable. For the longest time, he had believed they were equals. Now, he felt like some side character in his best friend's story. Of course, he knew the test wasn't rigged, but still, the thought wouldn't leave his mind. But this wasn't the time to dwell on it. For now, he pushed those thoughts aside and focused on moving forward. With that settled, the two were about to head to the training grounds when they ran into a familiar face, Chen Jiachang, the same guy who had been selling spirit fish with Liang the other day. But judging by how immediately Libo stepped forward, sizing him up, it was very clear that these two had history, bad blood. Within seconds, the tension skyrocketed. And just like that, they were one wrong move away from throwing punches, which, obviously, Liang could not allow. If they actually started a fight here, they'd be in serious trouble. So before things could spiral out of control, he stepped in and shut it down. Once the tension cooled off, he asked if Ji Chang was here for martial arts training as well. He was. Turns out, he had been selling spirit fish for the same reason, to save up enough money to enter the school as soon as possible. That was good news. The more people with the same determination, the better. Wasting no time, Liang invited him to join them, especially since Senior Hu was already at the training grounds. They could not afford to miss this opportunity. So, with that in mind, they joined the other members for training. And that's when they realized they were about to die. The intensity was insane. Their muscles spasmed. Their limbs felt like jelly. Their lungs burned, gasping for breath. They were not built for this. Thankfully, just as they were about to collapse, Senior Hu finally called for a break. Salvation. But it wasn't over. Instructor Lu would be taking over in the afternoon. Meaning, this break was just a temporary reprieve. And that's when Libo, sweat-drenched, exhausted, and done, started seriously considering quitting. This was torture. He wasn't built for this level of pain, which of course made Jie Chang burst into laughter, calling him weak-willed on the spot. But before they could even process their suffering, trouble arrived. Yang Kai and his lackeys, and they wasted no time making their presence known, throwing insults, acting like they owned the place. But that wasn't even the worst part. These guys had the audacity to demand 100 coins from them as a donation, claiming that if they paid up, they'd be allowed to stay in the sect. Absolute nonsense. Even Senior Hu never treated them like this. Libo? Livid, ready to throw hands on the spot. He knew his skills weren't exactly on par with theirs. Didn't care. He just wanted the satisfaction of punching at least one of these guys in the face. But before he could make a move, Ji Chang stopped him. Picking a fight here wouldn't just be reckless. It would cause unnecessary trouble for Senior Hu, which was the last thing they needed. Even Liang hesitated. He wasn't the type to back down, but 3 cultivators at once? Not exactly a fair fight, and just as he feared, Yang Kai took this moment to boast. Loudly. He was about to break through the skin barrier, and what better way to test it out than on some newbies like them? Yeah. This was not a fight they could win. If only they were near a river. Then, Liang could work with that. But right now, this was a losing battle. Thankfully, Senior Hu returned before things could escalate, and he wasn't playing around. Not only did he shut down the confrontation, but he also made sure Yang Kai and his lackeys were punished for their antics. That only made Yang Kai hate them even more. Before leaving, he threw out empty threats, promising they'd pay for this, which of course only annoyed Senior Hu further. So just for that, their punishment increased. But things weren't as easy as they seemed. As they left, At that moment, his pet contacted him through aquasense, warning him there was an enemy in the pond, which, absolutely not. That pond was his base, his key to getting stronger. There was no way he was letting anything happen to it. So, without wasting another second, he told the others he had something to take care of. Then, he bolted. Meanwhile, as night fell, Libo and Jie Chang were strolling around the sect. That's when Libo finally started wondering why Liang still hadn't returned, which of course Jie Chang wasted no time teasing him about, calling him obsessed, like someone missing their boyfriend. Libo? Instantly pissed. Just as they were about to start bickering again, a sudden round of applause snapped their attention away. They turned, and there he was, Yang Kai, with his crew, and judging by the look on his face, he was ready to finish what he had started earlier. Yang Kai wasn't just here to fight, he was here to humiliate. And Libo and Ji Chang? They were nothing more than punching bags to him. The moment he started throwing punches, it was clear they were completely outmatched. But beating them down wasn't enough. His real target? Liang. And since he wasn't around, Kai turned to Ji Chang instead, demanding to know where he was. Ji Chang, of course, wasn't about to sell out his friend. So instead of answering, he did the next best thing. He grabbed a brick and smashed it straight into Kai's ugly face. Bold move, but completely useless. Kai didn't even flinch. If anything, he just looked pissed. And Jie Chang? He was about to suffer for it. Kai stomped his face straight into the ground, grinding his foot down to make sure he understood exactly where he stood. But even that wasn't enough. No, Kai was feeling extra petty tonight. Sure, messing them up any further would definitely get him punished. But his intrusive thoughts? They won. So, without hesitation, he ordered his lackeys to keep watch at the gate while he handled business. The trio nodded, ready to move. But then, Libo. Libo actually decided to retaliate. Now, here's the thing. If your opponent is smiling at you while you charge, you should just back away and call it a day. That's common sense. But Libo? Yeah, he didn't get the memo. So he rushed in anyway, and paid for it immediately. Kai just twisted his arm so hard it might as well have been a lever. Then, just to drive the lesson home, he slammed him to the ground, pinning him like he was about to violate him. But Kai wasn't here for Libo. He had bigger priorities. Jie Chang, the one who had the audacity to slap him with a brick. And if he wanted to play dirty, then fine. Kai would return the favor. But this time, he wasn't just going to beat him up. He wanted to have fun with those pretty little eyes of his. Let's see how well Ji Chang could train. When one of them was gone, Liang had finally made it back to the lake, cruising along with his pets. But something felt off. That uneasy feeling wouldn't go away, and if even his lazy Croc and Chonky, who was nearly at the skin realm, were scared enough to send him a message, then whatever freaked them out wasn't just some random beast. This was a real monster. Still, there was no running now. If danger was coming, he had to face it head on. So as soon as they reached the area where the beast had last been spotted, he pressed forward. But to his surprise, there was no monster in sight, just the destruction it had left behind. And judging by the sheer level of damage, this thing was huge. That meant he had to find it fast. To do that, he needed every ounce of energy he could get. So without wasting time, he transformed his pets back to their smaller forms and activated Aqua Vision. After significantly upgrading his fusion level, his underwater perception had expanded from 1 meter to 6, letting him capture details on the seabed way more clearly. Tracking the beast became a lot easier, but the moment he locked onto it, his expression shifted. Because this thing didn't just meet his expectations, it exceeded them. He had underestimated it. This thing wasn't just a beast, it was straight out of Aquaman's nightmares. A massive-ass crab with enormous armored appendages and claws. It was way bigger than both of his beasts combined, even if they merged together. And with that kind of size, it should have already developed sentience. According to Instructor Hu, any beast that surpassed the skin realm was considered a spirit beast, so this thing had definitely reached that level. But then again, it couldn't be too strong, or his lazy Croc and Chonky wouldn't have been able to escape in the first place. Still, that didn't mean it was weak. Taking it down wasn't going to be easy, and with zero preparation, they were at a serious disadvantage. So, Should they even fight it now? This wasn't part of the plan. But then again, when had his life ever gone according to plan? Uncertainty, accidents, danger. That's just how it was, and he had always adapted and made the most of whatever came his way. Besides, this was his pond, and he wasn't about to let some oversized crab claim it as its territory. So without hesitation, he decided to kill the damn thing. He transformed his pets back to their original forms. And even though they were underwater, they looked fire as hell while doing it. His AA farming session had officially begun, and suddenly, he booked it straight toward the crab at top speed. But the crab wasn't just standing there waiting to get attacked. It grabbed a boulder with one of its massive claws, embedded it with mana, and launched it like a barrage of massive bullets. The projectiles rained down with terrifying speed, completely shattering their advance. Liang quickly realized they had to target its claws first, so he ordered Lazy Croc to lock in, commanding the beast to sink its massive fangs into the crab's armored limb in an attempt to break it. But it was no use. That shell was ridiculously durable, practically invincible. Brute force alone? Not gonna work. So he switched up the strategy. Using his water manipulation, he suspended the crab's other claw in place, creating an opening. That's when Chonky jumped in, chomped down on one of the crab's eyes, and ripped it clean out. But instead of weakening the monster, it just made it 10 times angrier. The crab broke free from Liang's hold and went berserk, flailing its claws and stomping around like a wild beast. And in the process, it destroyed several of Liang's precious spirit plants. Oh, hell no. Now he was pissed. But before he could even react, the crab had already closed the distance, and with terrifying speed, it rocked the absolute hell out of him. The force sent him flying several feet away, but Liang wasn't about to let himself get knocked out just like that. He was too mad for that. So he forced himself to stay conscious, got back on his feet, and prepared to face this thing head on. But brute force wasn't enough. He needed a weak spot. So he took a moment to analyze the crab, watching how it instinctively protected its abdomen, even when taking multiple wounds elsewhere. That was it. That had to be its weak spot. This was his chance. He had to end it in one strike. So he gathered every last bit of energy, compressed the surrounding water, and formed rings around his spear. Each ring would add a burst of acceleration, significantly increasing its penetration power. But with his energy reserves drained, he could barely manage two before his body started bleeding from the strain. Still, he pushed through, because this was do or die. With everything he had left, he launched his spear straight at the crab's exposed abdomen, and just as he expected, that spot was way softer than the rest of its body. His spear tore through its flesh, piercing clean through to the other side. Liang was ecstatic, but there was no time to celebrate, because the moment his adrenaline ran out, his body completely shut down. He lost consciousness right then and there. The next thing he knew, he wasn't underwater anymore. For a moment he was confused, but then he saw his Croc and Chonky nearby, which meant they had saved him yet again. He owed them big time. So, as a thank you, he reached out and gave them both a well-deserved head pat. But before he could fully relax, he noticed something. At first, he wasn't sure what he was looking at, but as he got closer, it hit him. The demonic crab they had just fought had been dragged out of the water. They actually brought the entire thing with them. And honestly, he was beyond grateful, because this big-ass crab was about to bless him with an insane amount of water essence. And even better, since it was a spirit beast, it had to taste amazing. Just thinking about it made his mouth water. But his delicious daydream was interrupted when he noticed his Croc pointing at something inside the crab. He stepped closer, and that's when he saw it. This crab was female, and inside, a cluster of crab eggs. Liang's eyes lit up. He had been feeling a little regretful about not taming the crab. But now, he might still have a chance. The problem was, he couldn't just wait for them to hatch. The survival rate was way too low, and he wasn't about to play babysitter. That left him with only one option: use his blood domination talisman and force an evolution. He engraved the seal, held his breath, and waited. But at first, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the egg twitched. A tiny claw burst through the shell, cracking it open. Seconds later, a baby crab emerged, and it was adorable. Like, Even Chonky couldn't compete with this level of cuteness, but don't let that fool you, because this little guy had the potential to evolve into a stone crab king, just like the one he had just fought. Liang wasted no time cooking up the giant crab and digging in. And let's be real, this wasn't just good food, this was god-tier cuisine. Every bite was packed with pure water essence, and the effects hit him almost instantly. His fusion rate skyrocketed from 10% to a staggering 36.6%, something he didn't even think was possible. The boost was so massive that the water monkey's power inside him surged, inching them even closer to becoming one. Its instincts and combat sense weren't just foreign thoughts anymore. No, they were familiar. It was like he had always known them. And the best part? His wounds were completely healed. Meanwhile, his pets just stared at him, absolutely awestruck. And honestly, who could blame them? With water spiraling around him like some kind of newly crowned sea god, he looked downright majestic. Once he fully adjusted to the fusion, excitement flooded through him. The physical enhancements were one thing, but the extra energy he gained, that was something else entirely. For the first time ever, he could sense his own blood energy. And if Instructor Hu's teachings were right, that meant he was dangerously close to breaking through the skin barrier, maybe even surpassing it. But he knew he wouldn't have reached this level without his pets, so he made sure to share the remaining crab meat and eggs with them. This would speed up their evolution, making things easier for them in the long run. And besides, the meat wouldn't stay fresh forever, and each egg only contained 6 points of water essence, not exactly worth hoarding. As for the tiny crab perched on his shoulder, which he had officially decided to name Fist, since it was literally the size of one, he chose not to feed it. Letting it eat its own kind just felt too cruel, even for him. Still, despite the power-up, he couldn't afford to get complacent. The Zhao Manor was still looming over him like a storm cloud. If he could break through the skin barrier within the next month, he would officially become a Marshall Hall student. And once that happened, the Zhao family wouldn't be able to touch him. That thought alone made him more than ready to return to the sect. Tomorrow's morning practice couldn't come soon enough. Meanwhile, over on Yang Kai's side of things, someone had finally taken notice of what he was up to, and they weren't about to let it slide. That someone? Xiao Hui. And he had zero intention of allowing anyone to defy the Marshall Hall's rules. But instead of backing down, Yang Kai just smirked, completely unfazed. Even though he was standing in front of an instructor, he knew Xiao Hui couldn't stop him. Why? Because he was acting under the direct orders of the Zhao family's third young master. And a dog like Xiao Hui should know his place. Unless, of course, he wanted Yang Kai to report his interference to the master. And the look on Xiao Hui's face said it all. Yang Kai and his lackeys burst into laughter, openly mocking him. Because no matter how much Xiao Hui acted like a Yang sect disciple, everyone knew. He still belonged to the Zhao Manor. If the family hadn't taken him and his father in, he wouldn't even be in the sect in the first place. And besides, his father was still living under their roof, which meant Xiao Hui had no real choice in the matter. Everyone knew that. And sure enough, Xiao Hui could only grit his teeth. His conviction and loyalty to the sect were being tested, but in the end, he had no choice but to lower his head and mutter an apology. To him, as long as his family was safe, he didn't care what happened to himself. And Yang Kai? Oh, he loved it. He mocked him even further, calling him a coward, the Zhao family's lapdog. The irony was completely lost on them, because they were in the exact same position, but they were too stupid to realize it. However, their arrogance was short-lived, because one single glob of spit to the face was all it took to yank them off their high horses. For all their boasting about how strong they were, Jai still looked at them like they were nothing more than pathetic ants. Ants who didn't even realize how small they truly were. But no matter how much Jai wanted to resist, he was still the weaker one here. Yang Kai was still the one standing, and he decided a lesson needed to be taught. So without hesitation, he snapped one of Libo's arms like it was nothing. And just like that, he made his point. If Jie didn't care about his own well-being, then fine, his friend could suffer in his place. And it worked. Jai was furious. But no matter how much rage burned in his eyes, he was still powerless to do anything about it, which only made things even more entertaining for Yang Kai. He was just about to have even more fun, confident that Instructor Hu wouldn't come to save them. Not after he had made sure the guy was occupied elsewhere before pulling this stunt. But all that smugness vanished the moment his minion's unconscious body started flying across the field. Shock froze Yang Kai in place. For a second he thought it was Instructor Hu, but when he turned around, it wasn't. It was Liang. And the moment Liang's eyes landed on his injured friend, a furious heat surged through his blood. His aura exploded around him. As he made one thing absolutely clear, he was going to knock out every single one of Yang Kai's teeth. Turns out, Instructor Hu and the Secmaster had been watching the whole thing from the very beginning. They had caught on to Yan Kai's little scheme early on, but instead of stepping in, they saw it as the perfect opportunity to observe their disciples, to see who they truly were when they thought no one was watching. Even so, Instructor Hu couldn't shake the feeling that this was on him. If he hadn't been so preoccupied, things wouldn't have spiraled out of control like this. After passing the blood step test earlier that day, he had let his excitement get the better of him, stopped to celebrate with a drink, and arrived late. And now, because of that, everything had escalated. But what really caught him off guard was Shiai. He never pegged him as the type to just stand by and do nothing while all of this happened. Before he could dwell on it, Master Yang finally spoke up, clarifying the situation. He had been watching much earlier, and he understood exactly why Shiai had frozen up. The boy had a good heart, but that was precisely the problem. He was paralyzed by it. And that was why he couldn't pass the blood step test. A fighter without courage was like a person without breath in their lungs. But now that they had gathered all the information they needed, Instructor Hu suggested they finally step in, especially since Liang Ku was only close to breaking through the skin barrier. There was no way he could actually win against Yan Kai in his current state. But Master Yang didn't move. Instead of interfering, he held back, his eyes fixed on Liang Ku. Because what he saw was different. The blood energy coursing through the boy's body was fierce, intense, and unlike anything he had seen from the others, this wasn't just a simple clash. Lang was brewing something inside him, so he decided to let the boy cook. Yan Kai wasted no time mocking Liang Ku, sneering at his so-called threat. But Liang, he had no patience for nonsense. That wasn't a threat, it was a promise, and he had zero intention of standing around waiting. So he charged straight at Yan Kai, closing the distance so fast that even the arrogant fool flinched. Panicking, Yan Kai barked orders at his goons to handle it instead. But of course, they weren't enough. Liang kicked the first guy aside, dodged a wild punch, and punished him with a clean right hook, then weaved out of a kick from the fatty and made him eat his fist instead. The punch landed so hard it knocked the guy's rabbit teeth clean out. But he wasn't here for these side characters. His real target was Yan Kai, and he was ready to fulfill his promise. Of course, Yan Kai still didn't see him as a threat. A smug grin played on his lips as he reminded himself he was at a higher level than Liang Ku. Some nobody like him could never stand on equal footing with him. The energy leaking from Liang's body was proof he was only approaching the skin barrier, a much lesser state than Yan Kai's. That alone should have been enough to scare Liang off, but strangely, it didn't. Not even a little, and that threw Yan Kai off. So he lunged forward, throwing a punch, only for Liang to block it with ease. And the fool got punished for it. First with a kick, then a devastating haymaker that sent him reeling. But Liang wasn't stopping there. He had made a promise, and he was damn well going to keep it. A brutal uppercut came next. Then another, a relentless storm of blows. That 1-2 punch-kick combo had Yan Kai staggering backward, each strike breaking down that false confidence, until all that was left was exhaustion. And of course, Liang Ku laughed at him. All that big talk only to get beaten down like this? Turns out, Yan Kai wasn't special at all. And that realization snapped Yan Kai right out of it. Getting beaten was one thing, but getting talked down to by some nobody? That was something he couldn't stomach. So, he whipped out a hidden dagger and figured it was time to show some generosity by stabbing Lang straight in the stomach. Then, a couple more times for good measure. And while he was at it, he made sure to remind Liang just how fatherless he was. But unfortunately for him, Liang was built like a damn tank. Even with multiple stab wounds, he was still conscious, still moving. And when Yan Kai went for another stab, Liangku caught the knife with his bare hand, like it was nothing, and before Yan Kai could even process that, he got hit with another haymaker, one so vicious it sent his pathetic head crashing into the ground, with enough force to practically cave it in on impact. And just like that, the arrogant fool was reduced to a crying mess, scrambling for help. He turned to Shiai, desperately pleading for intervention, babbling about sect rules, about how disciples weren't allowed to attack each other like this, which was hilarious, coming from someone who had just done the same thing a second ago. And for a moment, Shiai actually considered stepping in. After all, his father's safety was on the line. But before he could act, Master Yang decided he had seen enough. His sword flew into the ground, and his voice cut through the tension, commanding everyone to stop. Now that the fight had been brought to a halt, he wasted no time delivering judgment. The 6 involved, including Yan Kai, were to be exiled from the sect, never allowed to set foot in Martial Hall again. As for Shiai, he was to be sent to the confinement room until Master Yang dealt with him personally, and judging by Shiai's expression, he knew exactly what that meant. Meanwhile, Liangku sat there, frozen, because standing right in front of him was the legendary Yang Dongsheng. And after everything that had just happened, after the sheer rage he had unleashed, he knew this was the end of his journey in the sect. He had gone too far, he had done too much. So when Master Yang called his name, Liangku bowed his head, already expecting the worst. He was ready to be exiled, but little did he know. Master Yang wasn't angry at all. In fact, he was impressed. Instead of punishment, he offered something Liang never saw coming: a place as his direct disciple. Liang was speechless. For a split second, he thought he had misheard. The backing he had been desperately searching for, the security he needed, had just come to him on its own. And not just as any disciple, Master Yang's direct disciple. Never in his wildest dreams had he expected this. But damn, it was a welcome surprise. With this, his future in the sect was secure. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.